Hello and welcome to the University of Southern Indiana. This is training on the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. I'm Dr. Sarah Wannemuller, the Director of Assessment and Early Field Experience. You are viewing this video because you are either a teacher candidate preparing for field experience at the University of Southern Indiana or a student teacher preparing for that semester experience also. During this presentation, which lasts about 40 minutes, you will be viewing a PowerPoint presentation regarding the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. We will be looking at these slides, which are shared with us at the University of Southern Indiana by the U.S. Department of Education. And FERPA is an acronym that stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. FERPA is not new legislation. It has been around since the early 1970s. There have been very few changes or modifications to FERPA in that period of time, but it is timeless insofar as the importance that FERPA has on the confidentiality rights of our students and on the rights of parents. At the end of this video, you will be taking a quiz, so I encourage you to take notes as you go. You will also, after successfully completing the quiz, receive a certificate which can become a part of your professional portfolio. I also encourage you to add into your resume that you have been FERPA trained. So let's begin this training. FERPA is an acronym that stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And just that acronym alone pretty well is a descriptor. It deals with families, it deals with education, and it deals with the rights of students and of parents. It deals with privacy, and it was an act meaning it came about as a result of legislation. So what is FERPA? FERPA is a federal privacy law that affords parents the right to have access to their children's education records. And that means that if you are teaching and a parent requests to see their child's academic progress during the last several weeks, or request to see a particular test they have taken, the law says you need to supply that to them. The law also has a particular time parameter in which that needs to be supplied, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Parents have the right to have their child's record amended. If they don't agree with something that has been written about their child or records of their child, they do have the right to have those records amended. And parents have the right to consent to the disclosure of personally identifiable information from education records, except as those provided by law. So that means that for minors, which students in elementary and high school and early childhood, parents are the ones who sign permission slips. They sign permission to have records sent on to another institution or a school. For instance, when you were in high school, your parents would have signed the records for you to apply for admission to the University of Southern Indiana. So to which educational agencies and institutions does FERPA apply? FERPA applies to all elementary schools, all secondary schools, and all post-secondary schools. And the primary reason for that is there is federal money that is tied to adherence to FERPA. So if a school does not adhere to FERPA regulations, they could lose their federal funding, such as money for title programs or for free and reduced lunch. We think of education as really being a state system, and the state legislatures make decisions but 11% of the federal budget goes to help fund education. So indeed, while many of our laws and regulations and statutes and regulations for schools are at the state level, we also have a lot of federal entanglement in our schools, including this money, which is channeled to us through adherence of FERPA, or which can be withdrawn also. Now, this particular in-service about FERPA, you're only going to get the basics. If you were to take a school law course, a graduate course here at the University of Southern Indiana, you would get a more extensive description of FERPA. So what are education records? Earlier I said in another slide that parents have the right to education records about their child. Education records are anything that's directly related to a student. So that would be their report cards. That would be what's in the teacher's grade book. That would be whatever's in their permanent record file. That would be their health records. Anything that's directly related, the educational testing, the standardized testings, that's all directly related to a child. Maintained by an educational agency or institution or by a party acting for that agency or institution. Generally at schools, we keep records in locked, fireproof filing cabinets. Teachers may keep them in their grade books also. And the grade books, we need to be careful where they are if we use paper grade books. A lot of grades today are kept electronically, and they are on safe servers in our school as well. It's a part of the slide that talks about a party acting for the agency or institution. Sometimes when colleges and universities are holding students' transcripts, they have them held in a clearinghouse. So they would be maintaining your transcripts. So they may not be right at the University of Southern Indiana, but they may be at another clearinghouse where you would request them if you need copies of your transcripts. Education records do not include these things. A sole possession records, such as those used by a teacher as a personal memory aid. For instance, as a teacher, there are going to be a lot of things that happen in your classroom with students that you're not going to remember that on October the 12th, this happened with a particular student, and the same student had an incident on November the 3rd. And so you might keep what are called sole possession records. Those things that you keep when your personal memory will fail. Those are not education records, and they do not belong in a child's educational file. Law enforcement unit records. So if you have a student who's on probation and you have records from their probation officer, they do not go in their official file as an education record. Those are law enforcement records. Alumni records. This would refer to, like, as a graduate of a high school, how much money you gave to the annual fund every year. That does not go into your educational record. And then peer graded papers before they are collected and recorded by the teacher. Now, this is a practice that happens in classrooms across the United States every day. Have you ever been asked to switch your paper with someone else, and they grade your paper and you grade their paper? Well, as a future teacher, I used to love the opportunity to get out my red pen and grade someone's paper. However, I didn't feel the same about someone grading my papers. Now, while it does happen and it's not illegal, I'm not so certain it is best practice of teaching because of what may happen after the papers are graded and students go on the playground. But it is not a violation of FERPA, because that grade doesn't become a part of a child's educational record until that grade is recorded in a teacher's grade book. So what is personally identifiable information? Personally identifiable information may include a child's name or a person's name. Your first name, your middle name, and your last name is personally identifiable information. Your mother's maiden name. Sometimes for security purposes, you are asked that question, what is your mother's maiden name? Because that's personally identifiable. Your address and your date of birth are both personally identifiable pieces of information. And yet, I think about the times when we go to pick up a prescription at a pharmacy and they ask you to make sure it's you, what's your address, what's your date of birth. Now, when you give that information for your address, you only have to give the number. You only have to give the number of your residence. You don't have to give the street. The same thing is true for date of birth. You just have to give the month and the day. You don't have to give the year. Now, if you think about it, if someone is also sitting around waiting to pick up their prescription, and they hear your name, and they hear your address, and they hear your date of birth, they have enough information for identity theft. So you want to be very careful about sharing those pieces of information. Your Social Security number is personally identifiable information. That's how we are identified in many ways in the federal government. However, there was a time where Social Security numbers were on all checks. They were on all driver's licenses that were issued. And at university, it was a common practice for professors to list test grades, not by a person's name, but by their Social Security number, and post them in the hall. But of course, they were always in alphabetical order. So it was easy to tell whose Social Security number and grade went with who. And then parents' names are personally identifiable information because the combination of those two parents' names together would identify a particular student. Other information that alone or in combination is linked or linkable to a specific student that would allow a reasonable person in the school community who does not have personal knowledge of the relevant circumstances to identify who the student is with reasonable certainty. So you want to be very careful as the teacher about sharing information. For instance, not using the student's name, but maybe mentioning a student who lives on a particular road and it's the only house on that road. So you say, you know, the student who lives on Jones Road, whose parents own an ice cream store. Okay, that's personally pretty identifiable information. Information that's requested by a person who the educational agency or institution really believes knows the identity of the student or whom the record relates to. I'm always very cautious, though, of giving any information to someone unless I am certain that they have a right to know that information. This gets into the situation of, are grandparents custodial, and do they have a right to information about a child's progress? And the answer to that is really no. What about a live-in girlfriend or boyfriend of the father or the mother, even though they're not married to the child's parent? And just because they live there and they drive the student to and from school doesn't mean that they have the right to have information about that child's records. So as teachers, we want to be very careful about who we share that information with. At University of Southern Indiana, we have a directory. As a teacher in a school, you're going to be included in a faculty directory. So what is directory information? Well, personally identifiable information that's not generally considered harmful or an invasion of privacy. When a directory is published in your school, when you're a teacher, they will generally ask, do you want to have your home address included in there and your home telephone number? As a principal for a couple of decades, I would say always put the address, the school address, because you're going to spend a lot of time there, and always the phone number as a school phone number. A student's Social Security number should not be included in directory information, and generally not a student's ID number either. Your ID at USI would not be included. Now, on your student ID badge here at USI, your number, your student ID number is included because that's used whenever you're maybe purchasing your meal plan or when you're purchasing something in the bookstore. But you want to also kind of hold that confidential and not put that in a on your tray at lunchtime where other people can see your student ID number. You want to also hold that in a confidential way. When you turned 18 or when you entered post-secondary education, no matter what age you were, all of your FERPA rights transferred from your parents to you. Even if you entered university at 17, you're not 18 yet from a constitutional perspective, and you're not an adult yet from that perspective, all of your FERPA rights transfer to you, which means that your parents do not have the right to call your professor and talk about your performance on a particular test. By law, the professor cannot speak to your parents about that. The same thing is true with a tuition bill. Your parents cannot just call the university and talk about that without your signing a consent of disclosure that allows your parents to talk to financial affairs regarding those issues. Now, earlier I said parents have a right to inspect and review their child's education records. The law says that the school must comply with that, but they have up to 45 days to do that. Now, this would be a long period of time, and most parents would not find that acceptable. So most school districts have said 48 hours or 72 hours is a reasonable amount of time for a teacher to produce student work for parents. Now, schools generally are required to give only the copies, not the originals. And if a parent could not come to school to get that information, it would be allowable to send that via electronic means, as long as you are certain of who is the receptor of that information. Schools cannot destroy records once parents have asked for them. So if parents have asked to see a student's record, they cannot shred them or burn them or destroy them. And if the records contain information about more than one student, the requesting parent or the eligible student may inspect, review, or be informed of only the specific information that deals with their own child's records. And when this usually happens is when there's a project with 4 students together and every student gets their own grade. And so parents may come in and say, well, I want to see how everybody else in the group did. Do they all get the same grade as my child? And under FERPA, you cannot do that. Parents do have a right to file a complaint. They can file a written complaint regarding that their FERPA rights have been violated. But they have to file that complaint within 180 days. And 180 days is typically what we think of as the length of time of a school year. Now, that's a pretty long period of time, but some parents may come back a year or 2 later when their child cannot get into an institution of high school or college and want their child's record amended. And that's why this law says they have to file to have their records changed or file a complaint within 180 days. Every year, schools or institutions have a responsibility to notify parents and students about their rights under FERPA. So this usually occurs through the publication of the annual school handbook. And this is where the school would say that your child's rights are protected under FERPA, your child's rights to confidentiality. So there are some exceptions, though, to this general consent. Generally, in the annual notification, the institution would say to school officials who have a legitimate educational interest, student records may be disclosed. For instance, we have a report card of schools in the state of Indiana. And so students' records on standardized tests are supplied, not the names, but the institution, the school that they're from, would be supplied to the State Department in order to rank individual schools. Some other exceptions are schools in which a student seeks or intends to enroll. So if a student is going to transfer from your school to another school, The principal may want to call another principal from the transferring school to find out information about that student. To state and local officials pursuant to a state statute in connection with the student serving in the juvenile justice system. If there's a student that's on probation and the probation officer comes in and wants to speak to the teacher or the principal about a student, then they do not have to call the parent and ask for permission or get a consent signed for that. Also, to comply with a judicial order or a subpoena. And generally, when there's a subpoena, I have found in my experience, a lot of times it's with a right of a custodial case as to who should have custody of the children. And so the teacher might be subpoenaed to come in and to testify on the best placement for that child. And then to organizations, accrediting organizations. And all schools go through accreditation processes, as do universities, and supplying information about the students to those agencies is done without having each student sign a consent at the university level or each parent signing that in elementary or secondary. So what is an education program? In the earlier slide, we looked at the education programs that have federal money tied to them, but it's really a bigger list than this. It's any institution that is engaged in education. It's not limited to early childhood education or elementary and secondary education or post-secondary education or special education, job training, career and technical education, and adult education. If it is a cake decorating class, if it is bartending school or cosmetology school, it's not just what we think of as the comprehensive educational programs. Any program that is administered by an educational agency or an institution. So what conditions apply under health and safety emergencies to disclosure of information? Disclosure is necessary to protect the life, the health, or the safety of students or others. So as a principal, I had an experience with a student who was HIV positive and who fell on the playground and suffered a compound fracture. The parents were not able to be there when the EMTs arrived. And I was asked the question, is there anything I need to know about this particular student before they transported them? And I said, well, this student is HIV positive. Now, no one else in the school community knew about that. However, in this emergency, I felt it was important for the student as well as for the healthcare workers as well to know that. So FERPA would have protected me under this emergency for disclosing that information. There was a significant threat to the health or safety of a student or other individuals, and must record pertinent information when it discloses the personally identifiable information. And this was pertinent information that sometimes we have to disclose in order to protect a student or protect the larger population. So now we're going to look at some scenarios to see some things about FERPA that in actual situations and how you would respond to that. So this is going to be a yes or a no response. This is a directory information. A reporter is making a request. The school designates name, address, telephone listing, email address, and honors and awards received as directory information. A reporter from the local newspaper calls the school and informs the school that he's writing an article about the success of Hispanic students. The reporter asks the school for the name and contact information for all the Hispanic students who made the honor roll for the current school year. Are the names and contact information for all the Hispanic students who made the honor roll for the current school year directory information? Now think about it. Could you share the names of only the Hispanic students, so now you're separating them out, and those who are on the honor roll? Okay, if you answered no, that's the correct information, because that's confidential information. Grades are confidential information. If you made the honor roll, if you made the A honor roll, what do we know about you? Because you're an A student. But if you didn't make the honor roll, what we know about you is you're not an A student. So that's confidential information. And we would never separate those groups by ethnicity either. The answer is here for you on this one. It has to do with still directory information and students who have a particular disability. The school designates name, address, telephone listing, email address, and honors and awards received as directory information. A nonprofit organization that has programs for special needs children asks the school for directory information on students who have a certain disability. Can the names and contact information for these students be disclosed to the organization as directory information? And the answer to that is no. And I want to caution you, because sometimes as teachers, you'll receive a phone call or a request to share with a particular company, a particular pharmaceutical company, the names of students who could benefit from these services. And once again, even if they offer to pay you, which they sometimes do, this is confidential information that cannot be shared. All right, the next scenario. Overdue library books. A public school district lists the names of students who have overdue library books on their website, as well as posts the list on the school bulletin board. Is this permissible under FERPA? And it is not permissible under FERPA. What a person reads becomes personally identifiable information about them. As a principal, I was always amazed by students who would go to the library, particularly those who had a very challenging time reading, and would check out a 500-page book. And I knew they would never be able to read that book. So I would say to them, you're probably going to finish that book so quickly. Let's choose a book to just read for fun. And then we would find a book on their reading level. Because students, even at a young age, know that I'm valued by the kinds of books that I read. And so it's a confidentiality, it's a FERPA violation to put on the bulletin board the names of books that students are reading, even if they are overdue. Student health records. The school nurse at a middle school wants to share information with teachers and administrators. Which law would it be? FERPA or HIPAA that protects the privacy of student health records? Now, I know we're all familiar with HIPAA because when you go to the doctor, you have to sign the HIPAA privacy rules that say that your medical records cannot be shared with anyone else other than those that you designate. However, when medical records are kept in a school as part of our school's official records, they're protected by FERPA and cannot be shared. So health records retained by the school are protected by FERPA. Well, I hope that this presentation about FERPA has helped you to learn something that you will be able to carry into your classroom to protect the privacy rights of your students. Also, to help protect your privacy rights as a university student as well. If you have any questions, my contact information was on the last slide. I am more than glad to be present and help you with that. And this is just another step for you on your way to becoming a professional educator.